This is Cogitations with Carl Hartman, minister at Main Street Church of Christ in Lockney.
Good morning. Glad you're tuned in this Sunday morning to 106.1 The Flip FM for another iteration of Cogitations as we continue to take a look at how we can know beyond a reasonable doubt that the only sound explanation for our universe is that a divine mind, a divine being is behind it, is responsible for it. Previously, we looked at the law of cause and effect, and as we kind of take a scientific approach here at the beginning, but we've looked at that law of cause and effect and how every effect that we witness has to have an adequate cause. And so the universe, the fact that the universe exists requires an adequate cause. And so we have kind of examined some of the options that are put forth for that adequate cause. And we have concluded in that matter is not eternal. Matter is not the cause that was there and informed the universe in some massive explosion. Energy, which is now this replacer of matter in the Big Bang Theory, cannot be the cause because for the same reason they disqualified matter in their scientific exploration, you have to disqualify energy because you can't have energy without matter pre-existing that energy to produce it. So that is not an adequate explanation, and we have explored that already on this program as we have looked at fact number one. And then we went through the laws of thermodynamics and how they inform us concerning the energy of the universe, because fundamentally all energy in one way, shape, or form is heat energy. There is heat produced. And we've looked at that and how that kind of correlates to the ultimate outcome of our universe, that all the elements will be melted away. And so we find ourselves coming into fact number two. We have eliminated matter. We've eliminated energy as a causality of the universe. And so that leaves us with needing to find another explanation. There needs to be something else that is not comprised of matter or is the byproduct of matter being energy, the ability of matter to do work, okay? And you have to have mass to have energy, and the definition of matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. So if you have something that has mass, then it is matter, and it's part of the equation for energy, E equals mc squared, where the m is mass. So let's look at the second fact. We've talked about the difference between a hypothesis, a theory, a fact, and a law, or a law and a fact. Facts trump laws. So the first fact was the universe exists. But now we come into our second fact, and that's the fact that the universe shows signs of design. Any manufactured item in existence has an individual or group or individuals that or group of individuals that invented, designed, crafted it. Nothing is the only thing that comes from no one. We looked at that previously, how science understands that something cannot come from nothing. There has to be that adequate cause. So nothing produces nothing. And so since the universe exists, and since as we examine the universe, and that's really the heart of most science, the heart of most science is to examine what they observe, and they see these designs in the universe. It's everywhere. And so we seek to understand those designs. Now you have two choices. There's really ultimately two choices when you see the signs of design in the universe. It either all happened by blind, random chance, or there was a divine planner. There was planning involved, calculations done. We quoted previously on the program from a world-renowned physicist and really a PhD in multiple disciplines, Mr. Darcy, who was a brilliant scientist. But he is quoted as saying, a theory with mathematical beauty is more likely to be correct than an ugly one that fits some experimental data. God is a mathematician of a very high order, and he used very advanced mathematics in constructing the universe. You see, an honest examination, even by scientists, comes only to one conclusion. There had to be that mathematician of a supreme caliber behind the universe. So it can't be blind chance. So let's consider some things. I'm going to go back to a story that is told about Sir Isaac Newton. And it's said that Newton had a friend who was an atheist, or at least an agnostic. An atheist is simply doesn't believe in any kind of divine power behind the universe or in existence, whereas agnostic doesn't believe or disbelieve necessarily, but just says, how can we know? We can't really know. But Sir Isaac Newton had a craftsman build a model of the solar system. And it's similar to the models that we see in a lot of classrooms today with the sun and the planets to scale scaped out around it. You can even, on some of them, move the planets in their orbit around the sun on the wires that suspend them. And so Sir Isaac Newton has this model of the solar system crafted and sitting there at his abode, and Newton's friend comes over. So one day Newton's friend came for a visit and saw this wonderful model and begins to examine it, begins to see how it moves and how it works, just like the solar system. He was greatly impressed by the workmanship. And so it's said that his friend asked, who made this fantastic model? Because obviously his friend, being one of a scientific mind, would like a similar model for himself. So he asked, who made this fantastic model? Newton simply replied, no one. So his friend began to argue. Now wait just a minute. The friend couldn't fathom that such a wonderful model of the solar system didn't have some designer, some craftsman behind it. So the friend countered and begins to argue, do you mean to say you think I will buy such a preposterous statement? I wasn't born yesterday. This had to have a creator. Please give me his name so that I can have a similar model made. Newton looked at his friend for several minutes and then said, point well taken, except you look at this puny model and say it must have a creator. Yet the magnificent solar system from which it is modeled, you believe to be an accident. Is it possible you have not looked at the evidence well enough? It's said that at some point that friend became a believer. Design demands a designer. A mathematician once calculated that there was a 1 times 10 to the 84th chance that nature could be the way that it is by blind chance. So that is a 1 with a whole lot of zeros behind it. Sit down sometime and just write a 1 and put 85 zeros behind it. And then see if you can figure out what that number is. You probably have to Google it, because I don't get too far. I get hundreds, thousands, millions, billions, trillions. What's after that? Jillions. And it keeps going. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 sets of triple zeros after I get to that point. on top of the 6 that I already labeled. It's a massive number. None of us would put a dime on those odds. Well, the same mathematician, in order to kind of put it in a word picture that we could understand what these odds really look like, he gave us an example, and he used the state of Texas, oddly enough, the one that we're in right now. And when it comes to states, Texas is pretty massive. Think of maps that you have seen where Texas is like overlaid over Europe and encompasses several countries there. Texas is enormous. And so to put it in perspective, this is the example he gave. Take 4 quarters. Take one of those quarters and paint just one side of that quarter red. So you have 4 quarters. One of those quarters, one side only, is painted red. Fly over the state of Texas at high altitude, and at random moments, throw a quarter out of the plane. So now you have 4 quarters randomly distributed across the state of Texas. Now go to the exact center of Texas with a helicopter, land that helicopter in the exact middle of Texas, and there deposit a blind man with no aid. So you have a blind man standing in the middle of Texas, and that blind man, without any assistance or aid, is to wander the state of Texas and find one of those quarters. And the quarter that blind man happens to find, the first quarter the blind man happens to find, is the one in which one side is painted red and the red side's up. Astronomical odds. That is really the definition of impossible. It is impossible for the universe in which we exist in, for our own existence to happen by sheer chance. Design demands a designer. This was only considering the bigger elements and not the near endless multitudes of minute details of all that comprises the universe. When you start to take them into consideration, that 1 times 10 to the 84th power begins to multiply exponentially to an enormous number that is the sheer definition of impossible. Let's just note a few things out of literally billions that could not have occurred by mere chance. You know, the Earth rotates at approximately 1,000 miles per hour. It's actually slowly slowing down. It's not so much you would even notice in your lifetime or the lifetime of several generations, but it is slowly slowing down. But if it was moving at a significantly less pace than it is now, we would fry. If it was moving at a significantly faster pace, we would freeze. And we can see this in the observation of other planets within our solar system. And so we find that we are on a planet that's rotational cycle is designed to keep us from being way too hot all the time or freezing cold all the time. The Earth is tilted at exactly 23 degrees, giving us seasons instead of continents of ice. And so the axial tilt of the Earth is also in perfect design to sustain life here. If the moon were 50,000 miles away instead of its actual distance, tides would be so enormous that twice each day all land would be flooded. See, that moon is in the perfect place. But looking back at entropy, as we looked when we were looking at the thermodynamics, and things are moving from order to chaos, the moon is actually, on average, drifting an inch away every years. So just as the earth is slowly slowing down, the moon is slowly increasing the gap. And so we find that we started in a perfect setting. But of course, the universe is moving towards disorder, ever so slowly creeping in that direction. That's one of the things that goes to the limiting factors of the universe. Not something I'm really going to get all into today, but when you say 4.6 billion years ago, well, that means that 4.6 billion years ago, the moon was 4.6 billion inches closer to the Earth. Do the math. Break down those inches into feet. Divide it by 12. That gives you the feet. How many feet are in a mile? A little over 5,000 feet, if I remember correctly. Divide it by that. That's how many miles. You're sitting there at roughly like 71,000 miles, 72,000 miles that the moon would have been closer. And guess what? Going back to this example, there wouldn't be an Earth. There wouldn't be an Earth. Gravitation would just rip us apart. There wouldn't be an Earth. So it couldn't be that old. So there's limiting factors that are there. The sun has a surface temperature of 12,000 degrees. Let's lessen that temperature. And as the surface temperature of the sun lessens, well, things get colder and colder. If it was half of that, we'd be an ice ball, utterly frozen. If you increase it, it gets hotter and hotter, and even half more, the entire planet would just fry. And so we find that, again, another factor of design, just in the thermostat setting of the sun. You know, if the crust of the earth was just 10 feet thicker on average, there would be no oxygen. If the oceans were a few feet deeper on average, carbon dioxide and oxygen would have been absorbed and no life could exist. Take a salmon, for instance, and a salmon returns to the exact spot of birth to spawn a new generation after spending years in the open sea. Starlings use the sun to migrate by. Warblers use the moon and stars to navigate by. Who taught them that? It's ingrained in their design. Some birds need only Polaris, the North Star, to migrate. You have birds that are born in one location of the earth and somehow know how to migrate back to another place of the earth where they spend half their year without guidance, without direction. There's amazing things in our universe, and we can't even absorb the time. If I spent every single episode for the rest of this year of Cogitations looking at all of the factors of design, we would have just barely hit the snowflake on the tip of the iceberg of all the data that shows design. So hopefully these serve as a couple of examples of the fact that our universe is a universe of design that has been crafted by a divine mind. And so there's a divine mind that is behind this universe. And so we have to contemplate all of the things that comprise the universe and what it is made out of. So let's consider another fact. You know, our universe shows signs of design, and there is countless examples of that throughout our world and throughout our solar system and throughout the universe. The balance, the harmony that is there could not be obtained by random chance. So let's start looking at a third fact. Humans possess a unique nature. You look across the entire animal kingdom. Every living thing that calls our planet home, humans stand out. We have a unique nature. compared to every other mammal, every reptile, every amphib, every fish, every bird, every insect, and any other classification of creature that calls this place home. Out of all the living creatures known to exist, human beings possess a unique nature that sets them apart from all other living creatures. So that leaves us with two choices. Two choices again on how we have this divine or have this unique nature. One is evolution. That is, the explanation has been put forth by many scientists. And remember, how is that labeled? It is the theory of evolution. It's not a law. It's not a fact. They just say, here we are. How did we get here? Well, here's our best guess. But there's a better, not so much guess. A divine creator. Just like everything in the universe shows signs of design, we human beings show signs of design. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why the other explanation is not a good explanation. Any theory that violates even one law of science needs to be balled up and thrown in the trash can. That's just it. It needs to be balled up and thrown in the trash can. So let's look at the first and second law of biogenesis. The first and second law of biogenesis, and just as you think, biogenesis, Genesis is beginning, just like the first book in the Bible. Genesis is the book of beginnings. It's the beginning of living things. Bio is the living things. So biology is the study of living things. Biogenesis is laws that govern how living things came to be. So the first and second law of biogenesis. The first law, all life comes from pre-existing life. If you actually look at the entirety of the evolutionary theory, it starts with a rock. Basically, minerals that are washed into a pool of water magically mix together and form a very simple life form, an amoeba that slowly evolves into other things. Those minerals are not life. Therefore, the theory defies the first law that governs the science of biology. The first law of biogenesis, all life comes from pre-existing life. God is life. The second law of biogenesis, all life reproduces after its own kind. Now, kind is a little bit broad, but kind does not cross from amoeba to fish, from fish to amphib, from amphib to lizard, from lizard to avian or mammal. It doesn't cross over like that. Yes, I can take a zebra and a horse and mate them together and get an offspring, but they are both equestrians. They are the same kind. But I can't take an elephant and a giraffe and mate them and get something. They're not the same kind. I can't take a goldfish and a lizard and get a gold lizard. They're not the same kind. So in all of the observations of science that has informed the second law of biogenesis, it is understood beyond a shadow of a doubt in any mind that life reproduces after its own kind. We can't crossbreed with a horse and get a centaur, that creature of mythology. It doesn't happen. It has never happened. And so the fundamental laws that all of the life sciences are based on tell us evolution is a false theory. We'll get a little bit more into that perhaps as we move forward here. So as time progresses, we have an original population. And then we have geographical barriers that define that, and reproductive isolations, and then specifications that happen over time that tell us we can't have this theory. Humans possess a unique nature. And so there's some key points to think about when we look at the theory of evolution. And we may just pause here and pick up and continue next Sunday morning, because with the time remaining, I'm not really going to be able to get through these 5 key points. And so I don't want to leave you halfway through them between now and next Sunday morning. But spend some time contemplating what we have talked about. You know, we live in a wonderful age of Google. You can still go to your local library, and I encourage it. And me personally, I like holding the book in my hand and turning the pages. But you can look at all of the design in the universe. Look at all of the factors that are there, billions of things that show sign of design, and ask yourself, can that really have just randomly come into being? You know, sometimes when I teach a class, radio, you don't get a lot of visual on radio except for what you can visualize in your mind. But do this at some point. And I would do this in class when I was teaching this content in a classroom environment. I would take a simple kid's puzzle. We're talking about one of those hard, thick pieced puzzles that may have 4, 5, 6 pieces, right? And drop the board on the floor and take those 4 to 6 pieces of the puzzle and just start dropping them. Pick them up and drop them. Pick them up and drop them. And ask yourself, ask the class, how many times will it take me of dropping these that they will all fall into their right place to form the complete puzzle? And even with 4 pieces, I could sit there, and I did it once for a month. Every day of class, and that class met every day of the week. So every day of the week, Monday through Friday, for an entire month, randomly throughout the class period, dropping those pieces for probably at least a dozen times each class. And guess what? Over the course of that time, not even one piece fell into the right place. But the theory of evolution demands that the complex atomic structures that form even one living, the most basic living thing, randomly fell into place. The odds are nil. It is impossible. Contemplate these things between now and next Sunday. Understand that there's really only one logical explanation: that some divine, eternal mind created and placed those pieces where they needed to be, because life is a complex puzzle with trillions upon trillions of puzzle pieces that need to be fitted together to form the complete picture of life. Think on these things. I thank you for spending your Sunday morning, 30 minutes of it, with me here on Cogitations on 106.1 Flip FM. I look forward to continuing this study and this discussion with you next Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Until then, I hope that God blesses you, God watches over you, that God keeps you until that time. Until then, stay studying His Word. Keep your mind focused on the hope that He has offered, and understand that you have one who has designed you and knitted you together. Seek Him out. Seek out the purpose that He has for you. I thank you, and I look forward to continuing with you next Sunday morning here on Cogitations.
Tune in next Sunday at 9 for another edition of Cogitations with Carl Hartman, minister at Main Street Church of Christ in Lockney.